Hey guys, what's up? Today is August 30th, 2022 for all you space listeners out there. We have a special guest in studio with us today. We're going to be talking about the St. Louis startup scene, the growth in St. Louis for entrepreneurs, business owners, and we're pretty excited. So Nathan, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about who you are? You were on our last episode, but take a little bit of time to, really talk about what's going on, who you are, what you do, and a little bit about the scene here in St. Louis.
Sure. I cover startups, technology, and innovation for the St. Louis Business Journal. As part of that, I run our St. Louis Inno platform, which is kind of a standalone publication that focuses specifically on entrepreneurship and startups. We've got a twice weekly newsletter that everyone should subscribe to that listens to this. But we also do events and public awards publications as well. So I've been doing it for four and a half years. So I've gotten a chance to cover a lot of the companies that have started up here in town. Kind of at this point, being in the role for almost a handful of years, I've gotten to see companies go from their 8 employees to some that are up to 170 employees. So I've kind of been on the ground floor of covering some of these companies. So pretty unique perspective that I've had over the years.
Yeah, that's cool. And before we get into like all the business talk, I'm curious, how do you guys figure out like the 30 under 30 or 40 under 40 or whatever? Because sometimes I'm like, well, how'd that person get there?
Yeah, because we're not on that list.
I know, and I'm a little,
Well, I'm happy I get to deflect on this answer because I'm pretty hands off on that. We do an Inno under. I'll use an example that I'm involved in. We do an Inno under 25 list every year. It's coming out in a couple weeks actually. We get nominations. We look through them. We whittle them down to a certain list. I think you look at every nomination on its own merits. Yeah. But I know for some like our 30 under 30, 40 under 40, we actually have judging panels do them. So they're like completely. We have past winners and folks in the community and say, here's who we liked. Out of these 180, pick the top 40. Yeah. Which sort of gives us a little bit, because it is a little biased from us to pick sometimes. So we try to.
Well, that's the thing. Like sometimes when I look at the list, it's and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way, but it's like, a senior attorney that works at a bigger company or something. Well, that's cool. But what about the guy that's creating a bunch of jobs and like innovating and things like that versus somebody that's working maybe that corporate role, So that's where I'm kind of like, that's interesting because I know that there's some people doing bigger things, but maybe they're really good at their job or something. So
yeah, with our under 25 list this year, we tried to make a really like comprehensive list of folks. I don't want to give any names out yet, but we've got people in venture capital, people that are founders, but it was really important for me also to include some folks that were employees within startups. Yeah, because it's really easy to glamorize the founders, and they do a lot of great work, but they have employees that help it make it happen. Yeah,
so can't do it without them. I know that.
So to start jumping into the startups, why is St. Louis a place for startups and entrepreneurs, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think, I talk to entrepreneurs. I ask this question a lot, asking it earlier today. I think, obviously, it's a lot of folks. I mean, here's what I hear from folks who run a business. Since I don't run a business, I'm going to sort of lean on that, what they see. But one, lower cost of living and operating a business. A lot of them like that there's a lot of universities nearby here that can pull talent. One thing I also hear a lot, and I think this is actually, and I agree with this a lot, is that I remember I was talking to someone who's an investor from Chicago one time, and they're at an event here. And it was like a pitch contest, and every investor was there. A bunch of people were there. And like he was like just wowed by it because he's like, I could never get these people in a room together in St. Louis, all the equivalents in Chicago. And I think it's really easy to get a hold of people. There's some people in town who's going to be hard to get a hold of, but here, like, you can call up to like, a big business and have a pretty good shot of getting at least meeting with someone who's in the C-suite. Yeah, they might not say yes to your idea, but they'll give you the time. Even 15 minutes on a phone call. I hear from entrepreneurs, it's like, how do you reach out and get a deal with this company? They're like, well, I just emailed them and they got back to me, and it's like, that's pretty cool.
Do you know who like Brian Matthews is?
Yeah.
So whenever I had launched the app, I reached out to him and I go, I know I'm not ready for funding. Like, I know that that's not going to happen. So, but I'd like to pick your brain on like, what are the pieces that need to be put in place to do so, like down the road, whatever, right? And he took the meeting and he like sat with me for 30 minutes. And he didn't have to do that, but he did it just because all I did was say, hey, I know I'm not there, but I want to be there. And how do I get there? And he was cool with laying out like a platform for me, so.
That's a perfect example of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's happened. I don't know if you know Barry Sandweiss. He also, as that progressed a little bit, another person made the connection, but he sat with me and he's like, so wait, you have 2 businesses. So this was kind of like me putting that on ice. He's like, you have two businesses and you make this amount of money with this business, and then you have this business that doesn't make any money right now, and he's like, what the fuck are you doing? he's like, just keep doing that and you'll be fine. And so I was like, that makes sense. So I did, and it actually worked out. So.
And you touched on this briefly when you talked about why it's a good place, but there's a lot of universities to pull from. But how do they recruit good employees to come here versus like, oh, let's go to LA or San Francisco or Miami? Is it literally just the cost of living? Or because I look at it in two ways of like, if I'm young, wanting to take a chance, I'd almost rather take a chance like living somewhere awesome, like cool.
Yeah.
Not saying St. Louis isn't cool. Like I've lived here my whole life. I love it. But I just feel like there's other options out there, and how do you get those people to stay?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the reality is that a lot more are being flexible about that. I mean, you talk to most startups in town that are growing, that a greater the portion of their workforce that's remote and outside of St. Louis pre-pandemic is obviously a lot more, pretty significantly, than it was 2 years ago. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, because if people are interacting with St. Louis in some degree that probably wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, I think that the challenging part with St. Louis and getting people here is like you're relying on the university systems a lot, because you almost have to have time here in St. Louis to like realize it's a pretty cool place to live a lot of time. Very few people come here and are wowed, and that's not necessarily there's a lot of reasons why that is, but I think you almost have to rely on the university systems to sort of incubate them and introduce them to St. Louis. I think having people come here, if it's not for salary reasons or whether you're a really promising company, I think it can be really hard. And I think more just letting them be where they're at.
Yeah, and I always point to like those pro athletes that come here, right? Like look at Albert Pujols, right? So he could live anywhere in the world, but he kept his home in St. Louis. Or all these athletes, they come here, they play here, and they keep residences in St. Louis for a reason, because it is a good place to live. Now, do I get bored here sometimes? Yeah. I mean, do I wish we had better public transportation, or like that one strip like Nashville has, or New Orleans, or something like that to boost tourism? Absolutely. But do you know the history of St. Louis? Like, it was booming, 1904, World's Fair, all that stuff. And then supposedly we were supposed to get like a Disney World or something like that.
Yeah, there was talks of that, yeah.
And then the mayor shut it down, and whoever the mayor was or whatever at that time really like turned off a lot of like big companies from coming here, I think. And so that's kind of why we faded away in comparison to Chicago or some of these other big cities. So because we were right on the Mississippi, and back then it was like this was the spot.
Yeah, we were talking about this in our newsroom recently. You're talking about being in the Mississippi. It seems like we're so disconnected from the water now, like for many reasons.
Yeah,
but, like that's not even really part of our identity, but we don't really make use of it to.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like you drive down 55, right? And the Mississippi's right there, but you're so like, it's just a bunch of like, it seems dirty between the highway and the Mississippi. And I think, isn't there a new, like, aren't they going to do this huge $1 billion project? Where is it going to be?
Yeah, it's a little bit, it's like in between, like where the Arch is at and Soulard's at.
Yeah.
Okay. But actually check out this week's edition of the Business Journal, because there's going to be a story on that. Have a deeper dive on it, and our real estate reporter's been spending a lot of time delving into that. But it's a bit confusing to me where that's at too.
But it's interesting, like, and I don't mean to dive too far, but if we're talking St. Louis, right? Like when Ballpark Village came, it put all these other like little bars that weren't at Ballpark Village out of business. But then that kind of faded away, took the Landing out of play. You know what I mean? But then there's this another development, and then people go there for a little bit, and then there's another, and the reality is everything that is cool is just kind of far away from each other, in terms of like being able to walk there or something. Like if I go to a different city that has a lot to offer. So
we talked about this off air. Venture capitalists have poured in almost $700 million last year, which is up over 300% from 2014. What does that tell you about St. Louis and startups in general? And then to go along with that, the average VC deal in 2014 was $2.7 million, and last year was $12 million. So what can you accredit to both of those stats?
Yeah, I think St. Louis is it's grown on its own merit in the amount of venture capital it's lured, but it's also part of a greater trend. I mean, last year was a record year overall, I think, which helped St. Louis startups. But I think that second stat probably speaks more to St. Louis. I mean, I think it's a sign of maturing companies. Like we had a crop of companies maybe 5 years ago that were all raising $1 million seed rounds or around there, and now they're raising 8, 20, $25 million rounds. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about like Clever Real Estate. I mean, I remember I wrote about their first $1 million seed round. They closed an $8 million round last year.
I invested.
Okay, awesome.
So hopefully they.
So you're playing a role. I just talked to them the other day. They sound like they're doing pretty well. And then like a Balto, I remember writing about Balto when they did their $1 million seed round, and now they've since raised $52 million, and that was 3 years ago. So I think you're seeing more companies. The challenge is like that stat's got to be like 25 million when you look back at it in another 5 years to really grow. In my opinion, like if you're one of those companies to eventually like either, or I mean, if it doesn't grow, it's because like someone like a company that raised $25 million Series B round just grew so fast they went right to exit rather than having to raise a Series Z or something or Series D. So like you either need those numbers to grow or you need the exits, one or the other, to really hang your hat on.
So I have a couple theories on this right now.
Yeah.
Right. So you look at those stats, you look at like all this, like that 12.7 million or whatever it was, like these funding rounds going way up. Well, what was really low last year was interest rates, right? So money was cheap, especially for investors. They could go get $1 billion line of credit at a 1% or something like that whenever federal interest rates are zero. And they can pour that money into these startups. Well, now that interest rates are rising, do you see a lot of down rounds coming?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's where
that number's going to be way less this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that if you look at all these companies that are doing layoffs right now, because everybody's like, oh, tech layoffs, it almost seems like every company that's laying off, not everyone, but the majority of them are companies that are burning cash to acquire customers. They're not profitable, basically. Yeah. And so now they realize, well, it's going to be hard to get more money, and we need to figure out how to become profitable, so we need to cut these people. Do you think that's the reason around and this is on a nationwide scale, not just St. Louis, in terms of tech layoffs and getting money? I do think that there has to be a lot of down rounds coming because the money isn't as accessible even for the investors.
Yeah. Well, and some of those companies, it's easy to blame the companies for go and they're the ones obviously doing it. But, their investors probably told them when they put that money in, we'll come back in a year and we'll do this round. And now they're coming back and saying, go another year. We'll come back. We'll talk again in next year and do that Series C round. But I think this is actually a big year for companies to actually show their weight, that they've really got to operate at a really good, maybe, operate at a more efficient level than they thought they would at this time.
Well, that's my biggest fear with investing in startups. And I mean, I know that there's a formula that a lot of these investors do or whatnot, but when you look at a startup founder who never had to do it themselves, like they always use OPM, other people's money, to build a business, it's almost like, you know what I mean? They haven't had to really like grind for that.
They don't know like how it really feels.
And I'm not saying they don't work hard, right? Yeah. But I'm saying like they make decisions that burn cash with, they're not losing their own cash, if that makes sense. So I always find that interesting.
Yeah, it's like you get like two sides of the coin. You get some who probably reckless with it.
Yeah.
Then you have the others who are like, so like I'm spending someone else's money and like not caught, but they'll kind of just do whatever the investors maybe tell them, or like it's never like, it always seems like it's the two extremes that sometimes make news. It's like the people who are reckless with the money, and then you hear those crazy stories, and it's the folks who are like, I talk to entrepreneurs sometimes like, the investors are telling me to like go faster, but like I'm holding on, I'm clutching on to it.
But that's the thing is like, there's two types of people. Like, oh, I have all this money and my job is to burn it all, or I have other people's money. Holy shit, I have other people's money. That's where like I would struggle is it'd be like, I feel more responsible for other people's money than my own money, right? Like if I burn my money, that's on me. But if I fuck up and I burn their money, like that's holy shit, I just hurt somebody financially or something.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how that works. Like the WeWork. So WeWork's out of St. Louis.
Out of St. Louis, yeah.
Have you ever walked there? Walked through that?
No, I've seen pictures of it. We tried to go up last week to see when we were doing that story to see if it was open or not, but the building told us it was closed. So they wouldn't let us go up there. But.
because that building's like it's been purchased now, right?
I don't know.
So the Met Square building, that one, I mean, that one's pretty occupied.
Okay.
And it got a new owner, I think, in the last year or so. And the AT&T tower is the one that just got bought.
Oh, which is that was really low.
It's
there's no parking.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I mean, all those buildings obviously have taken probably a hit with their valuations with less occupancy, and
Yeah.
it'll be interesting. I mean, that's probably a topic for another day, but it'll be interesting to see what happens to the downtown. Well, any office. I was just reading an article yesterday about New York, trying to build new office buildings.
Really?
Even in New York, there's not enough demand.
So I know the former president of AT&T Midwest or whatever. He wasn't like the CEO of AT&T, but like he was the number one guy in that whole building, And I see him every week, and I ask him, I'm like, that was a good deal. And he's like, yeah, but here's the reality. It's like it's set up for almost one tenant. So you're going to have to do a lot of work to get it so you can like subdivide it. And there's no parking at all. They had a deal or something across the street with that bridge, and they had to remove it whenever they left. So that's an interesting one. But no, that WeWork building, you were in there.
Yeah.
That's where we started the podcast. We started as a book club and over like professional development book club. And then we became a podcast, but that was our first meeting. I could not believe the amount of money they spent on. So I just built this office, and I wanted tempered glass, and they're like, well, this is how much tempered glass is, like floor to ceiling. I was like, I'll just do drywall. But they have football fields of glass. Like the amount of money they spent to do that, and that the CEO, one of the reckless people to wrap all that
and
up.
we just talked about this though. He just came out with a new company.
Yeah,
and he raised
money.
the largest amount of money ever from.
Did he get that from Travis?
No, it was from the
Anderson Horowitz.
Yeah.
$350 million, the largest check they've ever wrote.
It's hard to understand what the company does too. I read what I read on the VC's website, but I'm sure there'll be more details that come.
It sounds like it's like a rental, like apartments and stuff like that, but they're gonna like try and make like the WeWork vibe of like, oh look, we have like, beer and soda in the pool.
Oh man, that just gave me a
sort of
business
stuff.
idea. What if you paid a monthly rent, but there were apartments all across the United States and like wherever you
you could use wherever. Maybe that's what they're doing. I don't know. He's got apartments in like Atlanta, Miami, New York. Like he's got 3,000 apartments that he's already bought.
Okay.
So
I didn't see
it's
that.
like that may be his model because nobody really knows exactly what he's going to do.
Yeah.
So it is interesting.
Huh, interesting.
So also talking about somewhat of an exit because he was exited out of his own company. St. Louis hasn't had like a huge, large exit. Or you can touch on a few that you said are large but have taken a big hit since. Is that what St. Louis needs to be considered like here's a stamp of approval, like we are a St. Louis, we are a LA, we are San Francisco, like we can sustain this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. I mean, there's 2 exits last year with Benson Hill and Nerdy that went through SPACs, public, and they're both, I guess, at the time minted unicorns. The stock, their current valuations would put them below that. But I think, obviously, if you've got a bunch of venture-backed companies in town, I guess it helps to have those big exits because investors get their returns. But I don't really know if you need. I mean, it helps from a PR standpoint of like when you're, promoting your city to other investors and other places. But I don't know. I also like the idea of just having a lot of really good run businesses by entrepreneurs here that aren't, even if they're only $50 million, $100 million businesses, they're making a profit, they're employing people. I think having a collection of really good run businesses. So I guess the analogy is if you had 3 or 4 great exits in St. Louis, and then all the other companies are pretty mediocre, like how good does that do?
Yeah.
I mean, I think exits are important for putting new capital, new people into the
Right,
the economy.
that's the key, right? Like, wait, what's going on in St. Louis?
Mhm.
There's some really good businesses. Maybe that's like a hidden gem, and everybody fear of missing out. All of a sudden, you have all these big investors come in, right? And then they're pouring cash in all the local startups. But what would you say? You interview a lot of these people. How many of the local startups that are here are started and run by people from actual St. Louis? Like I know Clever is, but if you look at Arch Grants or you look at Capital Innovators, which are some accelerators, like Capital Innovators, they'll take companies from, Columbus, Ohio, but you have to live here for 6 months or whatever it is, so they come here and maybe they start their company. Does that make sense? In terms of
I mean, there's a...
Like, are we printing local entrepreneurs or are entrepreneurs coming here?
I think if you ask people, you'd always want more, but I think they'd say we could probably do a little bit better job of starting entrepreneurs. I think, one thing for sure, I think from what I've noticed, there's probably not enough of a culture of failure yet in St. Louis. I don't think there's enough, there's some places in the country, if you have an idea, you fail. No one's gonna look at you bad. I think
That's actually like super interesting. Like I feel like we're gonna have to write that down as like a topic for our podcast because I do feel like that's actually like that's a perfect example of like what people need to do to like because a lot of people fail and they never start again.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's great. Sorry I interrupted.
No,
you.
I
That was
just don't know if there's
super
enough
interesting.
mechanisms or even enough support for people to like have their space to fail at this point.
Yeah.
And some of that, I mean, obviously there are examples of people who have failed and made it back, but yeah, I don't know. The challenge. I mean, I think the ideal is making the entrepreneurs from here, or however they came here. Even if they came here because a spouse moved here, their family's here. Like I've talked to entrepreneurs like that. Like because, like you said, if you bring those people in from Columbus, Ohio, or wherever they be, like that's great. You're introduced to St. Louis, and I'm sure they'll make some connections. And even if they leave, there'll be some sort of maybe they hire a remote employee, but like those people can go wherever they want, and they often will because where their business is best. Like if they get a big client in Wisconsin, they're probably going to go there, and who would blame them because it's going to help their business.
Well, you see some startups move, I would think, over time. You've seen them move, whether it's to Austin, San Francisco, wherever. There's more money there. So now I'm trying to get my Series B or whatever. I need to move my company because that's where the money is versus, we might do some mid-level funding, but do we ever get that $1 billion round or something?
And the thing, like, and it's like, I've talked to entrepreneurs who have done that before and gone elsewhere, and it's like, they don't want to. They feel somewhat bad about it, but they have shareholders who are responsible too. They have employees who are responsible too. So if it makes the most business sense, they have to do it because, and it's not even, I think sometimes we see it as a slight to St. Louis, which it is maybe structurally of some of the resources they have here, but it's like, I have to run this business and I have responsibility to other people. So
and you had mentioned like the universities around. So you look at Silicon Valley and you have Stanford right there, and you have some other top end universities. Boston has two awesome, you know what I mean? And I would assume they have a really solid startup scene, in New York. So, while we do have a lot of universities locally, do you think that education is that much more top tier towards entrepreneurs? Like a Harvard Business School has to be way better than, sorry, Brad, but your degree from Webster in business. You know what I mean?
And entrepreneurship. So they did offer that there.
So, but you know what I mean? And so,
I'm gonna mow your grass a little bit here. So we do have WashU, which I think is probably one of the best universities in the country. I don't know exactly how much they're pouring in, but I feel like right now the tech space and like science space is probably one of the bigger startup areas for success right now. So we do have WashU, which I think is great. But as far as like a business sense and so I think we probably are farming more of an employee generation here than we are like a founder.
Yeah. So, and so this happened actually at Nebula off Cherokee whenever you did that article. They asked me to speak, and it was WashU entrepreneurial students, right? And so I had this whole thing like here, because I have a recruiting business, and it was like, here's how I connect with CEOs who hopefully will use my service. So I walk up, and I'm already deathly afraid of public speaking, but I'm like, and these are the smartest entrepreneurial, students in, WashU, right? Yeah. And I go, so how many people here want to start their business? And I thought this was like, I was just throwing a softball where everybody's like me. And like 2 kids out of like 26 or something raised their hand. And I was like, what I'm about to talk about isn't going to I was shocked that they weren't wanting to own their own business, but they were in WashU's entrepreneurial program. It was baffling to me, actually. And so I don't know. It was just bizarre. So that's where I'm wondering is like pushing like people into their first entrepreneurial experience.
Yeah.
Do we have that, and do we have enough startups for people to work at? Because if you look at a lot of founders who have been very successful, they started at a startup as an employee, as one of like first employees, and then they branched out and started their own startup.
That's what worries me about remote work. Yeah. I mean, I totally get it. Once again, some are these companies in this labor market, you kind of have to do it. But like, take like a Balto, for example. Like they were at Top Ops, which was founded by Jim Eberlin, and they went off and started Balto. And Balto had a huge round last year, and Top Ops got sold. So it's like, two really great success stories. And like, if you have all your people, which is great, and I understand like people want to live in Austin or Silicon Valley when they're young and 20, but like those people, even if they work at a startup here in town, they say, I want to start something myself. They're probably not going to move to come here. They're probably going to do it out there.
Right. So like, Yeah. So the startups incubate more startups basically because they create entrepreneurs from being in the situation that a startup has to go through in the early stages that people don't learn about in schools.
And something that's interesting. So I do a lot of work for a CFO of a company that just went public. And he was talking just the other week about how these companies are struggling because they'll get these software engineers. Well, they find out that these engineers are working for 3 different companies at the same time because they're all remote. So he's like, they finally found out that we're software engineers that were working 4 hours a day.
I actually have a
but
buddy
they were
who
working
does
for
this.
like 3 different businesses at the same time, making $200,000 a year.
In the like in the New York Times and Washington Post about. In fact, I mean, as someone who barely can keep up with one job, having.
I mean, I know a buddy who does this, and I'm not going to say too much, but he has at one job it's 130,000 base, at the other job is 125, and I'm like, how do you manage that? And he's like, well, I just make sure my meetings are whatever, and he does get the work done because one of his jobs is for a very large company that they almost just pay him to stay on staff for when a project flares up. It's really weird, but they have so much resources. So I do think that happens a lot.
Yeah, for sure. So before we head out, we have to ask, who is the company or companies that excite you the most here in St. Louis that you see going from maybe nothing right now to in the next 5 years could be like your next like business that everybody knows about?
Yeah, I'll do a few. Yeah, I think one we talked about in the last episode was this Empower Me Wellness company. They've grown like crazy over the last couple of years, but trying to do like a new model for senior health, just kind of an interesting space. Intrigues me personally because I had family in senior health for a long time. So they're one to watch already. I mean, they just did a deal yesterday, so they're 2,800 employees. They're sort of that one that like maybe they could be the next unicorn. Who knows?
Yeah.
They're backed by Jim McKelvey, backed by Herman Companies, and so they've got some big names behind them. There's another startup. It's very small. It's called Intramotive. They're trying to make like an autonomous rail car.
I saw this.
It's like you just don't see that in St. Louis very often. Like someone going that ambitious and building something that like that's something you'd expect on the coast or maybe Austin or Boston. A couple of the guys came out of. I think one's from Boeing. I forget where the other one's. One of them went to Stanford, I think. So cool that they're in St. Louis. That's one to keep your eye on.
I reached out to them to see if I could make parts for them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was like, I mean, this is like perfect. So I reached out to them. I found that super interesting.
That's a cool one. Yeah, I'd probably say those are sort of the two ones. There's some cool stuff like Cover. I mean, this is one that just had the exit, but like Covercress. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. It's an ag tech startup. They're like creating a whole new crop.
Okay.
That can be a cover crop and for farmers and make money and then also be used to make diesel fuel.
Okay.
But that's like I love that one because like that one took a while.
Yeah. Who did they get bought by?
Bayer.
Bayer, that's right. I did see this article.
They buy everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to do with seeds or plants or whatever.
But like that one, I was talking to one of their investors and I was like,
because he didn't want to sell, right?
They were gonna, but like they haven't even fully commercially launched yet.
Okay.
But like they were thinking like let's sell in like 2026.
Yeah.
And they came like, well, let's just do the deal now. But like, and they're like, but they had like it's like one of those ones where like it took a while. It was gonna take like a decade to get to exit. But it's like you're not building a new piece of software. You're building like a whole new cover crop. That's like pretty cool. So those are three that have really been fun to write about. And even though Covercress got sold, it's still got a lot of milestones ahead and could play a big role in society.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so I appreciate you coming on with us. He's also going to be doing an article on us, I think, right? So it should be great.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah,
we'll see.
No, I'm definitely going to share this podcast for sure through our channels, and so yeah, if you're listening now and you want to find a link to listen to again, subscribe to our twice weekly newsletter. Just go to stlno.com. You can find all the information there, and we'll have a blurb about this and the podcast in there.
Cool.
Awesome.
Sounds
Appreciate
good,
you coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much.